Welcome back to Homes in Motion, the podcast where we explore what home really means, not just as a place, but as an evolving story shaped by geography, history, community, and most importantly, identity. I'm your host, MJ Flowers, and today we'll be diving into a question that goes beyond the city borders. And that question is, how did Cincinnati become the urban city that it is today? And I think that there's multiple ways to answer this. And, at first glance, Cincinnati looks like a classic Midwest city. Historic neighborhoods, riverfront views, industry, reinvention. But there's more behind it. The story is behind this transformation. The story behind this transformation is much deeper. It's messier. And it's more fascinating than I think that most people realize. And so today we will be unpacking how rivers, railroads, pork, funny enough, people, politics, and powerful institutions all shape the Cincinnati we know today. And how the story of this city helps us think differently about home and what goes into making a place home. And so where it all started. And I think that, honestly, to understand Cincinnati's identity, we have to go back long before the skyline, before the Bengals, or even before the name Queen City, as we famously know it. And Cincinnati's beginnings were shaped by land and ecology, just like William Cronon describes and Changes of the Land in his book. And, Cronon argues that society changes when our relationship to land changes. And what that means is how we go about using it, who controls it, and how its resources are organized. And I think that Cincinnati is the perfect example of this, of that example that Cronon used. And the city's entire foundation rests on the Ohio River, a natural highway that connected eastern markets to the expanding American frontier. And so before highways, before railroads, before cars, this river was quite literally everything. And so, you had goods flowing in, you had goods flowing out, and people arrived. You had migrants and traders and immigrants. And, each set of people brought their own skills and their own cultures that would shape the city's early character. And so as this was happening, the city started to grow. And by the early 1800s, as, historian Daniel Aaron writes, Cincinnati grew from a frontier settlement into Queen City of the West, a booming commercial center built on riverside trade, bustling markets, and the now famous pork industry that earned it the name Porkopolis. And Porkopolis, I'm sorry, I pronounced that wrong. But so my point is that, Cincinnati wasn't just growing, it was emerging, and it became to form an identity around labor, industry, and opportunity. And so as the 19th century moved forward, Cincinnati transformed dramatically, and David Stradling describes it as a shift from river city to highway metropolis. But before highways came, something even more powerful came, and that was the people. And so German immigrants built communities and beer halls and schools and a culture that still lives in Cincinnati today. So African Americans migrating north built neighborhoods and churches and networks of social support, even as they face discrimination and segregation. And I think that's extremely important for the marginalized, specifically African American people, because we even see how we grew as a people and how we were not bound to the traumas that we faced back in slavery times, and just with segregation in general. We were able to pick ourselves up and migrate and truly add to an environment. And so we see that here in the transformation of the city. And so this blend of communities, it created a rich city culture, but it also created tensions, divisions, and competing visions for what the city should actually be. And so in the 20th century, railroads and highways came along, and this started to redefine our mobility in terms of how we got around the city, and jobs started to disappear, and neighborhoods started to decline, and inequality deepened, actually. And so, but yet the resilience of the city and the people that traveled or immigrated there, they kept it alive, because the story didn't end there. And so Cincinnati did not collapse, but instead it adapted. And and adaptation, I feel like, is a core part of any home's identity. There's so many different things that life will throw at us, and we'll go through how Cincinnati overcame. And so this brings us to the question is, who gets to shape the future of the city? And so we see all these people immigrating, and so many different skills, and so many different communities, and so many different tensions and disagreements over what the city should be. So who actually gets to shape the future of a city? And so according to the Brookings case study by Joseph Parilla, Cincinnati's evolution was heavily influenced by major institutions. And, if you're from Cincinnati, companies like Procter & Gamble, and some nonprofits and universities and civic groups and public-private partnerships. And these institutions, they didn't just fund projects, they guided the city's direction. And so they reshaped downtown, and they invested in workforce programs and led efforts to create inclusive growth. And so when you say the word inclusive, you think that, that includes every community and every tribe and every tongue, and some, that's not true in this case. And some neighborhoods saw revitalization, others saw displacement. Some felt like they gained opportunity, and others felt outlooked. And so I feel like urban change is rarely neutral. And when a city is reinvented, and homes are reinvented, and sometimes preserved, and sometimes erased, sometimes rebuilt in ways that benefit some more than others, I think it's important that we understand this tension is part of understanding what home really means. And so why does the story of why does this matter? Like, why am I talking about this? And what does this story of Cincinnati matter? Why does it matter when we're asking, what does home mean? And I think it matters because Cincinnati, I think the story of this teaches us that home isn't fixed. It evolves, and it's shaped by geography and politics, unfortunately sometimes, and culture and power, unfortunately at times. And home is built by the people who arrive with hope. Home is changed by the institutions that hold influence. And I think that home is contested by those who fear displacement. And home is reimagined by those who believe transformation is possible. And so with that, Cincinnati became the city it is today because of its land, the river that shaped its birth, its people, the immigrants, the migrants, the workers, the families, its industries, from port to manufacturing to modern corporate life, and its institutions. And these were the engines of reinvention. And so it's conflicts and conversations as well about race and space and belonging and identity. And to understand Cincinnati is to understand a broader American truth. And this brings me to my final point, is we see Cincinnati, what I think is setting of example that should be followed when we look deeply within the roots of how this city came to be, is that home is not just where we live. Home is what we build. And I strongly believe that we build home from togetherness and through struggle and through vision and through change, and how much tension that may bring, I think requires on the people. But I think that this is extremely important because, being able to adapt is crucial for growth and well-being. And managing stress and solving problems and finding happiness in the midst of life's constant changes and challenges is extremely important, because I believe it directly correlates to how we feel about our physical surroundings, i.e. space and place. Because challenges can bring opportunity to find comfort and security, whether that is adjusting our homes towards how we feel or how we're aging, or creating personal sanctuaries within new environments, fostering the feeling of home even when circumstances shift. And so that's my challenge to the listeners is, after this podcast, how can you take the story of Cincinnati, the changes, the adjustments, the transformations, the tension, the adaptation that had to take place? How can you apply this to your life, and how can you use this in your own physical space and home? So thank you for listening to Homes in Motion. It's your host, MJ Flowers. Catch you on the next one.